Castles and palaces. They always have a reputation for ghosts and spirits. So, here's another one. Let's have a look at Lambeth Palace in London, in the UK. And welcome back to the Brac Shop. This is the portal to the paranormal, the spiritual, and the unexplained. And I'm Tom from the shop. So welcome back. And if it's your first time, welcome. Lambeth Palace. It's located in London on the banks of the River Thames, almost opposite the Houses of Parliament. And it's actually the London residence of the Archbishop of Canterbury. This is his London's abode and workplace. Well, originally, it used to be known as the Manor of Lambeth, or Lambeth House. And then back in the 1200s, it was sold to the Archbishop of Canterbury, which made it his place of residence. The oldest parts of Lambeth Palace dates back to the early 1400s. We have Lollards Tower, which was originally built around 1435 to 1440. Later on, in 1495, Cardinal John Morton built Morton's Tower as the front and the entrance of Lambeth Palace. There is a church, which seems to be in a very peculiar position. And now when you think about it, Morton's Tower was built in 1495. Now the church beside it, St. Mary's at Lambeth, was originally set up back in 1062, about 400 years earlier, and originally was built as a wooden building, a wooden church. It wasn't until 1377 that they actually built the stone tower. That building dates back to 1377, and you can't actually go in at the moment because of COVID, but when it is open again, you can actually climb to the top of the tower and have a look outside the top. Then in 1972, it got deconsecrated, and it was just sitting there. It was almost going to be demolished until 1977, when the Tradescant family actually saved it and turned it into the Museum of Garden History, which is now known as the Garden Museum. So that is basically the story of Lambeth Palace. And the palace itself has gone through quite a few things through the centuries. Like it was ransacked during the English Civil War in the 1600s, and was also bombed during the Second World War. If you enjoy this video, get some value out of it, find it interesting, please press the like button and tell your friends and share it and have a discussion about the ghosts I'll talk about shortly. And if it's your first time, welcome, and please subscribe and press the bell and the all notifications button so you don't miss out. Lambeth Palace, located on the south bank of the River Thames in London. It was a very good location because you could access the palace by the river, which is where a lot of the notable people used to do. They would travel up and down the river. Looking down the river, you have Westminster Palace, which is now the Houses of Parliament, and there would be no bridges until you got to London Bridge back then. Kept going further down. After Henry VIII's time, you had Greenwich Palace, and if you went upstream, you would also have Hampton Court and the other areas that you could get to by the river. So the river was a main source of traffic back in the olden days. There's been reports of Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII. Now, people have said that they've heard a woman crying in the crypt. Now, was it Anne Boleyn? Some say it was, and some say they've actually seen her barge at the river and her boarding the barge to go to the Tower of London for her execution. However, history states differently. Now, the court of Lambeth did hold the trial. Anne Boleyn was actually staying in Greenwich Palace when she was taken to the Tower on the 2nd of May back in 1536. And that's where she was trialed and sentenced to death. There was talk that she was having an affair with her brother, which was incest. So he was also sentenced to death on the 17th of May, and she was forced to watch his beheading on Tower Hill, the little hill just outside of the Tower of London. And then she was actually executed on the 19th of May. So history actually says that she wasn't at Lambeth Palace. So who was crying in the crypt, if anyone actually did hear someone crying? If it wasn't maybe the wind, or maybe it was someone else's ghost that they heard crying in the crypt. And the barge, seeing Anne Boleyn board the barge, depending on when these stories started as well, because apparently Queen Elizabeth I actually went to Lambeth Palace quite a few times in her late life. So maybe they were apparitions of her barge and her leaving the palace. Who's to know? But a very strange thing that did happen was, now remember, on the 19th of May, Anne Boleyn was to be beheaded in the Tower. And I'll put a link up the top there so you can see another episode on her at the Tower of London. Now, on that morning, there was a Scottish reformer, Alexander Alice. He was staying in London. Now, he had no idea that the Queen was to be executed, but he woke up that morning with a dream seeing the Queen's severed head. Now, he didn't know anything more of that, and later that day he went to visit the Archbishop, which he told him of his dream. And the Archbishop was so surprised that he hadn't known that the Queen was to be beheaded. And he had this premonition in his dream of the Queen being beheaded. How do you explain something like that? Now, Lollards Tower, built in 1435, around that time to about 1440. It's called Lollards Tower because apparently it's where the Lollards were imprisoned. Now, the Lollards were followers of John Wycliffe. He was a reformer of the church. He didn't agree with what the church said, so it was heresy. Now, when you look back into history, the Lollards were actually imprisoned in Lollards Tower in St. Paul's, the original St. Paul's, before it burnt down in the Great Fire of London. But we think that after the destruction of St. Paul's, the term moved over to Lambeth Palace, and that became known as Lollards Tower Originally it was known as the Water Tower, so it didn't actually get its name as Lollards Tower until quite later, probably around the 1600s. And the tower, that's where they used it as a prison. If you can see it here, I believe the prison was on the very top floor, because if you look at the outside, it actually matches pictures of the interior. It's supposed to be about the size of 13.5 feet by 9.5 feet and 8 feet high as well. So a reasonable space, depending on how many people are imprisoned in that room. The interior shows a fireplace and a window, and the window on the other wall. And if we look at the picture from here on the outside, it sort of matches. Most likely think that top floor would have been the prison, looking at the layout of where the windows are and the fireplace in the picture. Now, I wasn't actually able to ask anyone because the whole place is closed. Even the Garden Museum is closed because of COVID at present. Now, apparently in the Lollards Tower, there is a door that seems to lock unexpectedly. Scientifically speaking, people have said it's an old building, it's an old door and lock, and it's just not working properly. But other people have said otherwise. As back in World War II, and we think the date was about the 10th of May 1941 during the air raids. Now, there was a fire watchman on the roof, on the lookout for fires so he could put the coil out. And during the air raid, he was supposed to go down to the duty room, and he climbed off the roof and got stuck in this room. That door wouldn't open, and he couldn't get out. For about an hour, he was stuck in that room with all the air raids going on. And was this a blessing in disguise? Was this a friendly ghost or spirit at work? Because there was a direct hit by a bomb. It destroyed the chapel and a lot of the other parts of the palace, as well as the duty room. Now, if he had gone down to where he was supposed to be in the duty room, he definitely would have been killed. So, was this a friendly ghost? It's hard to say what is and what isn't, because there's not many reports of spirits from Lambeth Palace, or not that many anyway. But there is a little story that has come up from the graveyard of St. Mary's at Lambeth, because it was, as we've said, a church for centuries, and the surrounding grounds was used as a graveyard. In fact, the famous Captain Bligh, famous for the mutiny on the Bounty, he's buried in the graveyard. And also, you'll find the tomb of the Tradescant family, and I hope I've pronounced that word right as well. John Tradescant, he lived in the later part of the 1500s, and his son, also John Tradescant, lived in the beginning of the 1600s. And they were explorers, you could say. They traveled the known world, and they would come back with different little curiosities and oddities and exotic plants as well. Hence the Garden Museum. But they had a house close by that they actually opened up a museum and charged people to come in and see all these exotic things they brought back. It was known as the Tradescant Ark. Now, naturally, when they passed on, they were buried in the tomb, which is also in the graveyard. Now, I couldn't actually get close to the graveyard because that part of the graveyard has been built within the coffee shop, so I couldn't get in, have a look. In fact, I think you may have to go through the Garden Museum. Now, there is a story that if you dance around the tomb 12 times at midnight when Big Ben is chiming, a ghost or an apparition will appear. Now you wonder how genuine or how old this story is, because Big Ben, that has only been there since 1859. So you could say it's really a Victorian sort of rumor. Maybe it was started by schoolboys in the Victorian era where spiritualism and ghosts were becoming very popular. Who's to say? But these days it's probably really hard as it's all enclosed within the grounds of the Garden Museum now. But the tomb is not actually the real tomb anymore. Apparently it was crumbling and falling apart. So this is actually a replica, and it's made from the original drawings now in the Pepys Library in Cambridge. Now the next ghost I was able to find out about was Mercy Weller. Now just further down the road, they built an infant school, St. Mary's Infant School, built back in 1880. Now the headmistress there was Mercy Weller, and she lived there, and also her sister and her family lived there as well. Now in 1887, for some unknown reason, Mercy Weller passed away at a young age of about 39. Now her sister was going to take over as headmistress, but for some reason the church commissioners wouldn't allow her to, and so they left the school. Then in 1993, the Museum of Garden History, now Garden Museum, bought the building and integrated it into part of the museum, using it for activities and special events. And there was always reports of seeing this grey apparition walking around the school. Now it belongs to the Fairley House School, and apparently no reports of Mercy Weller. Maybe the last renovation managed to cleanse the building, maybe. Who's to say? So that's Lambeth Palace and the surrounding areas like St. Mary's at Lambeth Church. They're all integrated all together. Now you can go and visit the museum when COVID is over. It will be open again and you can visit there and walk up to the top of the tower, which, don't forget, dates back to 1377. The palace, however, is a working palace, and so it's where the Archbishop of Canterbury stays when he's in London. It's where he works from. So that is only open a few times during the year, when COVID isn't around, of course. If you are in London and do want to have a look, do check the website. So what do you think about Lambeth Palace? A very haunted palace, or just like a lot of the other buildings, really, that has their resident ghosts, you could say? And I must admit, not that many, although the door that sometimes opens and doesn't, maybe, but it is so old. Naturally, I would say there would be a few energies captured in that building. What do you think? Have you visited Lambeth Palace? Have you felt anything while you were there? And I think spirits really come out when it's quiet, when there's not many people around. That's my experiences anyway. Because I think if there's a lot of people, there's a lot of different vibrations, and the energy is just different or wrong, so to speak, so they won't appear. All my experiences is usually when it's quiet. So what do you think? Write your comments below and let me know. Let's start a discussion. And don't forget, you can join our Facebook group as well, and that's a place where we can interact with one another and discuss certain topics. Now, don't forget, if you've liked this episode, please press the like button. Tell your friends, share the video, have a discussion, and see what they think. And if it's your first time, welcome. I've hoped you've enjoyed this episode. And if it's not your first time and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and press the bell and the notification bell so you'll be notified when I do release new videos. And if you like, you can buy me a drink. The link's down below. Any drinks is really appreciated because you help the channel and you help me as well. So I am very grateful if you do. And have a look through our affiliate links down below as well, like our affiliate link to the Psychic Tree, and that's the UK's #1 spiritual store. And you can search through and find a wide range of spiritual products. They're reasonably priced, and they also charge a reasonable price for worldwide shipping. So do have a look. And you also get 10% off your first order. So please have a look around. So I've hoped you've enjoyed this episode. And until next time, stay well and happy.